It's too late to apologize. It's too late.
Hello kindred, and welcome back to another red letter lesson. So today we're gonna cover something that I admittedly never considered would be a part of this series, or really something I would talk about in general. Now I'm not gonna call out anyone specifically because it's not what this channel is about, but we've all seen those celebrity apologies, usually made on Twitter, that when you read it, you're like, this doesn't feel right, and someone points out, that person didn't actually apologize. And it just made me sort of click of, oh, what if people don't really quite know what is really involved in an apology? Not just, I'm sorry or I apologize. If it was that simple, everyone could do it, everyone would be doing it. So let's begin, shall we? Now, before you even begin with the steps of what an apology is, you have to assess the situation and believe there is a need for an apology. Much like magic, Harry, you have to mean it. Remember, practicing vigilant empathy is key. When someone tells you that you've hurt them, don't just hear it, listen. Actively listen. Absorb their words, their tone, pay attention to their body language, if they're making eye contact, all of it. Take it in without judgment. I know it's hard to let go of preconceptions, especially when you're taking in new information that might be challenging your current status quo, and that's a video unto itself, but you really need to try. If you find yourself listening for a particular piece of information you can latch on and respond to, you're not listening. If you find that you're sort of already constructing your counter argument in your head, you're not listening. Our brains, God's love them, are kind of our enemies when it comes to confrontation. We really don't want to be vulnerable, even if the other party has been vulnerable first. So our minds often want to combat the idea that we were in the wrong. So in these cases, I find it's very helpful to remove yourself from the situation. Take the you out of it. If your friend had come to you with a situation, confiding in you about what another friend had done, how would you feel about that? And if you're like an empathlete, ooh, that's a new word, empathlete, like an athlete at being an empath, then please literally, I know it's cliche, but put yourself in their shoes. Would you feel like you wanted an apology? Ooh, or perhaps you're like me and have the complete opposite problem where your brain is so ready to agree that you did something wrong that you might not actually stop and listen to what it is you did. Or you might just be willing to accept whatever this person tells you, even if they might not be remembering correctly, or in some of my cases, if they're trying to manipulate you. We're gonna touch a tiny bit on that just because I feel like it's kind of unavoidable. My point is, if you have anxiety brain like me, your brain hates you. And it's like, well, of course I did something wrong. I was probably wildly inconsiderate and just stuck in my own world because sometimes I can be the worst. No, stop it. First of all, that's not helpful for anybody. Secondly, that is not the way to an apology or to make anything actually be fixed. And thirdly, anxiety brain is, without a doubt, a complete asshole. But that's okay, because the actual structure of an apology can sort of help you decipher if an apology is needed. So essentially, there are three basic parts to an apology. Number one, the statement of regret. I'm sorry, or your preferred variant of that, whatever feels natural, I apologize. But it's essentially, I'm sorry for very specific thing I did or said. Specificity here is key. If you can't be specific, you don't know what you're apologizing for. And if you don't know what you're apologizing for, your apology is just air. It might as well just be... And you may need more information to be that specific, and that's completely fine. Asking for clarity is normal and actually can help with a better understanding between you and that person. If you are genuinely struggling to understand what exactly you did wrong, seeking to be more empathetic is a great first step. And most people, if you approach them in a compassionate and non-judgmental way, are very willing to talk with you and explain how you hurt them. and it can open a better dialogue between you and that person. Now, if you can't be specific and they can't be specific, there's a problem. It doesn't mean someone's trying to be emotionally manipulative, however. You might just both need to do some soul searching. And if you need to, there's nothing wrong with saying, I was hurt by this, and I'm not really sure why. Should open an open dialogue with you. Assuming that person's not a total jerk and just dismiss you with, well, maybe you're just being sensitive. But if this is someone who genuinely cares about you, and this is a friendship you have, it's likely that why you're upset is pretty complicated. You may find that neither of you need to apologize, or maybe both, for different things depending. But the important thing here is creating a dialogue between you and the other person, rather than putting someone on trial. On the other hand, if someone is unwilling to have a dialogue with you, it's possible they're engaging in some toxic behavior. I once had this friend in high school who was kind of nefarious for not telling you why they were angry at you, and even after you made up, you probably didn't actually know why they'd been mad at you in the first place, but you apologized because you felt bad and they were playing against your empathy. They'd love phrases like, you should know what you did wrong. Never once did they ever state specifically how they'd been wronged or what you did, and you would search your soul and never come to a real answer, and instead you just blindly apologize for a myriad of things, hoping something would stick. I'm sorry for being inconsiderate of your feelings. I'm sorry for being selfish. But nothing really ever got resolved because you didn't know why you were apologizing, and they didn't know why they wanted an apology. And I'm pretty sure they just wanted the apology looking back on this because it gave them a sense of control. Which brings me to part 2 of an apology. An actual apology. Acknowledgement of harm and consequences. An apology requires not just knowing what you did wrong, but why it was wrong. How did that cause harm to the person you're apologizing to, and what consequences became of that maybe you didn't have to deal with, but they did. And number 3, the clear steps you will be taking to avoid this mistake in the future. Look, it's good to know what you did wrong. It's good to know why it was wrong. But if you go on the next day to make the same mistake again and again, and you just never really learn from it, then your apology is kind of useless. An apology needs to also be what you're going to actively do in the future to avoid hurting them again. And yes, you can still make mistakes. Everyone's going to make mistakes. Human error, we're mortals, all that jazz. It's a thing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying I will never do this again, but you actually have to actively try to not do that again. So what does a genuine apology actually look like? And to break this down, we're going to use an example from Much Ado About Nothing, a play that really freaking needed a genuine apology. Gosh, dang it, Shakespeare. If you're not familiar with Much Ado About Nothing, here's the basic gist. A bunch of dudes, including the prince and his right-hand man, are hanging out at their countryman's villa. The prince's right-hand man, whose name is Claudio, is totally in love with the countryman's daughter, Hero. Now, you should know about the prince. The prince also has a brother who is just awful and evil. Claudio's like, I am so in love with Hero. I want to marry her. And so they're like, let's do it. However, the night before the marriage, Prince John and 2 of his cronies make it look like Hero's been sort of sleeping around. And instead of talking to Hero, instead of confronting her and being like, what the heck? He waits till the next morning during the wedding ceremony where he, again, instead of pulling her aside, goes through the ceremony until they get to the objection part and basically in front of everyone calls her a whore. Oh, it's not good. Hijinks ensue, and by the end of it, he knows the truth of what actually happened and they're together again. But no apology really ever actually happens. So here's how that apology probably should have gone. Hero, I'm sorry that I believed this guy I know to be a jerk over you. And I'm sorry that I used that misconception to shame you in front of everyone. I know my actions brought you intense distress, damaged your reputation to the point where you had to pretend that you died in order to bring it back. And that I turned your own father against you. And I promise, whether you forgive me or not, and I acknowledge I don't deserve your forgiveness. Oh, that's another note. Apologies should never be made thinking that you are owed forgiveness. That's super important to remember. Apologies are like asking. You are asking to be forgiven. You are not actually owed forgiveness. That's on the person to decide. And that doesn't make them a terrible person for not accepting your apology. Anyway, I promise I will never violate our trust in that way again. I will always come to you first. If I hear something, I will talk to you. I will not air our grievances in public because you don't deserve, nobody deserves to be publicly shamed like that. Whew, I got really sad. I'm like, Claudio, you should have apologized and you didn't deserve to marry her. Dick. Obviously, I am oversimplifying what that apology needed to be. I'm assuming there would be a lot more in that tacked on. But those are the basic parts of an apology. I'm sorry for what I did, this very specific thing. I know how this hurt you in this way, in this way, in this way. This is what I'm going to do to make sure I never do that to you again. Now that we've covered what an apology is, let's go over what an apology isn't, or what I like to call faux-apologies. Psychological projection. I'm sorry you feel that way. This sounds like an apology, but if you take more than half a second to really listen to it, you'll realize what it's actually saying is, I'm sorry this hurt you, but I'm not sorry I did it. Nor do I think I was wrong to do it. It's not an apology because it puts 100% of the responsibility on the other person. It's honestly a form of victim blaming. It's their fault for being hurt. And 9 times out of 10, you might as well just be saying, I'm not sorry for my actions. I did nothing wrong. This is all your fault for being so damn sensitive. Psychological projection faux apologies puts the onus entirely on you. This, of course, has other variations of equal to greater douchery along the lines of, I'm sorry you took it that way. I'm sorry that offended you. And my personal favorite, I didn't realize you were so sensitive about that. Excuse exposition. Excuse exposition. I never intended to hurt you. This is a very heartfelt sounding excuse. It often masquerades as an apology, especially from celebrity Twitter apologies, as we have all seen. I never intended to cause harm or offense. Well, of course you didn't. See, most creatures aren't innately malicious and plotting away in their lairs, seeing how they can best harm or offend the other people on the planet. It can be part of an apology, but when you get down to it, it's extraneous. It's not actually apologizing. It's not taking responsibility for anything. One might even argue it's dismissive. And it's certainly not saying how you're going to avoid doing that thing in the future. Most of the time when we hurt people around us, especially those we care about, it's an accident, but that doesn't erase the damage. As we've said before, I believe, if you accidentally kill someone with your car, it's still manslaughter. While intent does matter why you did something and can be part of an apology, it's actually pretty irrelevant in repairing the damage. And we often say it for our own benefit, not for the other person. And an apology is about the other person. It's not about clearing your own name. It's about making right. And then in some cases, other variations of this particular faux apology are not as well-meaning, such as, it was meant to be a joke, or I wasn't serious. The realist rejection. Note that I use realist with heavy sarcastic quotation. These apologies are almost always blatantly patronizing and consist of, I'm sorry, but whatever follows is always a blasé statement about the status quo, such as, that's just the way it is. I once knew a girl who would literally shrug and say, I'm sorry, but I'm a bitch. As if there was nothing she could do about that. Realist rejection faux apologies, and Yes, this is another phrase I kind of just made up. These types of faux apologies are a blatant rejection that an apology is needed, but patronizingly apply one anyway to placate the offended. And at last, the Maiyaculpa. I'm so sorry, I'm such a terrible person. Maiyaculpas are dangerous to both the person receiving the apology and often the person giving. They can often sound like an apology if you're not really listening. You can distinguish them by their overabundance of self-deprecation and complete lack of self-awareness and admittance of actual responsibility of action. I'm such a terrible person is not what you did wrong. It's not admitting fault, it's just insulting yourself. These are often made by two types of people. The first is someone who is struggling with their self-esteem. The second is that manipulative asshole again. The problem with this apology, among other things, is it doesn't admit what's wrong. It does not acknowledge the consequences or the harm. It's actually dismissing that there was a way to prevent it in the future because if you're such a terrible person, of course you did something horrible. Nothing is being resolved and it's likely going to repeat itself again. Your apology should be about taking responsibility for your actions and understanding what those actions did, not end with the other person comforting you. This is a very common tactic among narcissists, but you will also see it with people who are just struggling with low self-esteem. But here's the thing, regardless of your intent, it still manipulates the person you're apologizing to. And if you find you are apologizing because you really do believe you are the most terrible person in the world, take a deep breath. You're not evil incarnate, you do deserve friends, and by taking the steps to understand how you might have hurt them, how that affected them, and how you're gonna avoid doing that in the future, or how you're gonna keep those friends. I'm a terrible person. May sound like you're trying to make amends, but in the end you're making no effort to change the situation, because whether you know it or not, you're buying into the same mindset as the realist rejection. You can't change those circumstances. It's out of your control. You will, of course, encounter many variations of those faux apologies. I won't be able to cover all of them in all of their renditions, but I tried to give you a basic knowledge to work from. So what did we learn? There are a number of faux apologies that are pitfalls that you should definitely avoid. These steps that should essentially make up a genuine apology. And of course, most importantly, you have to mean your apology for it to be worth anything. If you don't feel you've done something wrong, it's not an apology. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you haven't poked that little notification bell, please be sure to do so. It lets you know when I post a new video because YouTube's algorithm is... I don't even know. Please share this with your friends and your family. Leave comments below on topics you might like me to cover in the future. And of course, most importantly, Joy Hunters, stay curious.